Audi TT Mk1, removing and reinstalling the instrument cluster.
Hi all, Andy here and welcome back to the channel, where tonight I'm undertaking a job that I can guarantee has affected every single one of you Mk1 Audi TT owners out there at some point. And that is the pixelated LCD screen on the dashboard cluster. Now, I'm not doing the LCD repair myself. I'm going to send the instrument cluster away for that, because for the money it costs, it's better to send it to the professionals. But what I am going to cover is how I've got the instrument cluster out of the car. I'm going to show you that before it goes away, so you can see how bad the cluster is. And once the cluster comes back in a couple of days, I'm going to refit that in the car, go through all the steps to show you what I've done. You can probably see tonight that I've got the car parked a decent distance from the wall, so I can get the door open for part of the removal process.
Due to the restricted movement in the garage, I actually loosened and removed the lower dashboard retaining screws from under the end fascia panel before moving the car inside. Pop off the fascia panel with a plastic blunt-ended tool, like a bicycle tyre lever, to reveal the retaining screws. You will see that there are actually 9 screws behind here, but we need to remove these 4. Other people have referred to 3, but I can confirm you need all 4 of these out. To remove and refit these screws, you need a T25 Torx bit. Using an angled Allen key type Torx bit is needed to get into the bolt nearest the door hinge due to space. One of my tips from other videos holds true here too. Use a piece of card with the layout of the screws drawn onto it as a holder for the screws. Make sure you put the right one back in the right hole, and also a handy place to keep them so they do not go missing. Simply push the screw through the cardboard.
So I've mentioned one of the first steps is removing the battery, or disconnecting the battery from the car. Before I disconnect the battery, I do need to take some precautions to prevent myself from being locked out of the car, or the car being unusable once I've disconnected that. So we must remember to keep all of the keys out of the car, so we can manually lock and unlock it if we need to. We must remember to make sure the car is unlocked as well. And we must also make sure that the doors are all closed before we disconnect the battery. So let's pop the bonnet and get that battery disconnected first.
To release the bonnet or hood, there is this handle in your right hand or driver's footwell in UK cars. Pull it, listen for the click, and then go to the front of the bonnet. Feel under the front edge of the bonnet for this lever just to the left of centre as you look at the car and push it up. The bonnet releases and you can then lift it to open. Next, remove the battery cover by sliding the engine fuses out and loosen and remove the negative terminal on the battery. This will require a 10mm socket normally, or a spanner. This should be enough to isolate the battery. Now make sure your steering wheel is in the lowered position. You can remove the wheel if you want to give you greater access, but this is not essential for removing the cluster. Push the adjust handle down to unlock, lower the wheel, then lock into position with the handle again. There are 2 screws holding the lower dashboard in place, one either side of the steering wheel. The first one is highlighted here. Again, with the T25 Torx bit, simply unscrew this. The second screw is on the other side of the steering wheel, slightly further down and back on the lower dashboard. Again, unscrew this to free up the lower dash. Now, you don't need to remove the lower dash to get the cluster out. You just need to lower it enough to access the 2 T25 Torx screws that secure the instrument cluster into the upper dash. Essentially, the lower dash covers the screw heads. Here is my screw card showing the 4 screws removed from the end of the dash, along with the 2 screws removed from the underneath of the dash on their own diagram. We can now turn our attention to removing the 2 Torx T25 screws that secure the cluster to the dash at its base. Here is the first one with the white spacer behind it. Simply remove this one and the other one on the other side of the steering wheel, and you will notice it frees up the cluster. Before you get too heavy-handed with the cluster trying to wrestle it out, and you will need to wrestle it out, make sure the 2 upper clips are free from the top of the dash housing. They are shown here. I managed to snap one of these off trying to get it out, but I have since restuck it into place. Fingers crossed it will hold. I would say try and get the right hand side of the cluster out first, so you can access the rear wiring on that side. The 3 wiring loom plugs in the back of the cluster are colour coded to make this easier. The one on the right is green and secured into place with a purple locking clip. To release, get a small screwdriver and prise the clip down away from the back of the cluster. It will swing free and the loom plug will come free also. Now free up the left hand side of the cluster in a similar way and release the purple clip that holds the blue loom plug in place. We are nearly there, but there is still one more loom to unplug. It is a grey one in the middle rear of the cluster. I was able to unclip the purple retainer off this loom with my fingers, which completely frees the cluster from the wiring. Now it's just a case of wiggling the cluster free around the steering wheel. So that's it, it's out. So the cluster is ready to be sent away, and I've made contact with Paul of PBH Services through one of the TT groups on Facebook. He was recommended by another Audi TT owner. For £80 plus the postage, Paul will replace the LCD and get it shipped back same day if he has it before 2 PM. Paul had great comms throughout this and was very helpful. He also provided cluster removal instructions. I will leave a link for him in the description. So 48 hours later from the package being collected from my front door, the cluster is back, so first-rate service there. There is a handy sticker on the cluster now that tells me the mileage and date of the repair, so let's get this back in the car and give it a try. First things first, to get the cluster in, you have to wiggle it in upside down and back to front. So the white back of the cluster is facing you. Now rotate the bottom of the cluster down towards you so it's lying on its back. It takes a bit of manoeuvring, but persevere. Take the grey wiring loom plug and insert it into the back of the cluster and lock the purple clip into place to secure it. Moving to the left hand side of the cluster, repeat the process with the blue wiring loom plug and lock the purple clip into place again. Lastly, plug the green wiring loom plug in and lock the purple clip. With the wiring all secure, simply line the cluster retaining clips up behind the top of the dashboard and gently rotate the cluster into position within the upper dash itself. It should press into place nicely and line up first time due to its moulded shape. Turning to my cardboard screw holder, I'm going to take the 2 cluster retaining screws and fix the cluster in position using the T25 Torx bit. When refitting and reattaching the lower dash, I find it easier to raise the steering wheel again into the most upper position. This makes clipping the lower dash into the 2 retaining clips either side of the steering wheel much easier. There is an air outlet that comes out of the centre console just under the lower dash inner edge, and you need to make sure you lift the lower dash over this when attaching, otherwise the inner screw does not reach the bracket. Insert both screws under the lower dash to fix in place once it is aligned and where it needs to be. It's now time to tighten the 4 fascia dash panel screws from the cardboard and replace the trim cover. The screw nearest the door hinge might need to wait until you can open the door fully if working in the garage like me. One more step until we can try the LCD panel out, and that is returning power to the car. So shut the door again and then replace the negative wire to the battery terminal and tighten this with a 10mm socket. Job done, time to try it out. So the moment of truth, turn in the ignition and all the usual lights come back to life. Focusing on the LCD itself, and it is absolutely perfect. No more missing pixels, and the screen that I've never been able to read, or at best guess what it was telling me, is clear and sharp. I think that is a massive win for the car, and a cracking job by Paul at PBH Services for turning this around for me. Thanks, Paul.
I hope that gives some insight into you out there on how to remove and replace your instrument cluster on your Audi TT, particularly if you're looking to replace the LCD screen. I highly recommend Paul at PBH Services. Turned it round nice and quick for me. £80, you can't go wrong. If you found the content useful in today's video, please do think about giving it a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing for future content. I cover a whole host of Audi TT fixes. There's plenty more to come, including next week's video, which will actually be replacing the Roadster roof. Thanks again for watching. Please do take care and see you soon.